Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Ivory, and you are tuned in to the Embracing Neurodiversity podcast, where I share my personal journey of embracing and enhancing the experience of my amazing son who is on the spectrum. Through this journey, I've discovered a lot about myself and continue to grow every day. My goal is to provide you with some useful insights and stories that will inspire you in your own parenting journey. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in as always. Today, I want to dive right in. I am continuing the conversation around workplace equity as it relates to people who are not neurodiverse. And today I want to specifically focus on neurodiverse people who are on the autism spectrum and their experience in the workplace. Again, as a disclaimer, I am speaking from the perspective of an educator, a diversity, equity, and inclusiveness practitioner, and a mother of a child on the spectrum. Last week, I did a podcast around simplifying what it means to be neurodiverse in terms of the terms. And at the tail end of that podcast, I spoke about how workplace inclusivity is going to be essential for those who identify as neurodiverse. I was reading an article recently that was written by a person who is neurodiverse and is specifically on the autism spectrum, in which she spoke about the inequities that exist in the workplace. I'm going to include her link in the bio below, but I wanted to talk about that a little bit more in depth from the parent's perspective, specifically as it relates to how we begin to raise children now so that they are prepared for the workplace in the future, right? And for me, a lot of my work is revolved around both supporting parents and, of course, taking care of themselves, but also instilling in their child who is neurodiverse, specifically who is autistic, a healthy sense of identity. And on the other end, my work is also revolved around facilitating workshops and conversations with workplaces and people in those spaces to begin to unpack those mindsets and create inclusive workplaces so that ultimately the gap is bridged and so that perhaps 5-10 years from now, neurodiverse people feel more empowered and included in workplaces. And what I'm going to do today is cover loosely and generally what the statistics are around employment for neurodiverse people, specifically people who are autistic. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how parents can prepare their child for the workplace, if that is possible for their children and if that is what their child wants. I'm going to jump right in. You'll see, as I've done in previous video podcasts, I'll have some statistics that will come up, but then I'm also going to expound on it a little bit. So, as always, if you see me looking over, I am looking at my notes. I always want to make sure that I am giving you clear information. If you have any comments or questions, please link them below or reach out to me. Let's jump right in. Okay, so this is something that I find myself repeating often, and this is the idea that the recent study for the unemployment rate for neurodiverse people, typically they like to label it people who are disabled. I do not like the term disability because of the stigmas that's attached to it around a lack of capability. And I know as a mom of a child who is on the autism spectrum that he is capable of many things. And therefore, I choose not to use the word disability because I don't see a disability when I see my child. But there are statistics around the unemployment rate for those who are labeled disabled, and that includes people who are on the autism spectrum. It's 85%, right? And for adults, I should be very clear about that. And so that's a very alarming percentage when you think about it. And for me, that's troubling because my ultimate goal is that my son is self-sufficient in the world in one way or the other. We'll talk about it in this podcast, but in future podcasts, there are a myriad of ways that our children can be productive and self-sufficient. That includes working, but also includes other things. But recent studies indicate that up to 85% of adults with autism are unemployed. I will include the link to that study below. And so, of course, it's highlighting this concern around the unemployment rate for the autism population. But what's most concerning about that for me is that although there's a high rate of unemployment, we also know that professionals with autism can be up to, they say, 140% more productive than a typical employee. When properly matched to the job that fits their strengths. Okay, I want to reiterate that. So productivity is high for those who are neurodiverse, specifically those who are on the autism spectrum, when they are placed in a job or when their employment is aligned to their strengths. However, we know that the unemployment rate is twice as high as a neurotypical person. So what does that tell us? It tells us that there is a clear line of discrimination, a systemic level of discrimination within the workplace as it relates to neurodiverse people, right? And so neurotypicality, those people who are neurotypical, meaning majority of the population, is favored when it comes to the job search, when it comes to filling applications, when it comes to the interview process. Most people are looking for personality and eye contact and all of these things that a neurotypical person could perform in an interview that perhaps a person on the autism spectrum, depending on who they are, may not. Now, I want to be very clear before I continue with this podcast that what I'm speaking of is the experience of a lot of people on the spectrum, but it is not the experience of everyone. And these are statements based on research, but when you are encountering an autistic person, ask them their experience and learn. But this is the general experience for most people on the autism spectrum, but not for everyone, right? So I want to be very clear about that as I'm speaking about these things. But because the job search, the job obtainment process is favored for those who are neurotypical, that doubles down on the discrimination that exists within not only the process, but the workplace. And so because we know that this currently exists, and the work that I do and that others do out there, the goal is that discrimination and exclusivity decreases over time. It's important for people who are neurodiverse and specifically those who are on the autism spectrum to gain a healthy sense of who they are so that they can advocate for themselves while seeking work and while in a workplace. I'm going to talk about ways in which parents can support their children in doing that now. If we know that companies should create inclusive policies to ensure an even level playing field for all of their employees, but they are failing to do so currently, what can we do as parents of children on the spectrum to support our child? Number one, help your child define what success looks like for them, specifically as it relates to career attainment, right? Obtaining a career or a job, however you want to look at it, looks different for each person, regardless of whether you are neurodiverse or neurotypical. But for the sake of this conversation, specifically, if you are on the autism spectrum, it may look differently. Maybe you are someone who needs a job so that you can make income for yourself and take care of yourself. Maybe you're someone who is looking for purpose and productivity, whatever the case may be, you have to get very clear about what your purpose is before you embark upon seeking work. And so as parents, it's important to starting now looking at what your child's interests are, what their strengths are, what they are capable of doing, what are their areas of growth, and think about the careers and the jobs that align to those particular strengths and interests. It is never too early. My child is 6 years old and he has a plethora of interests, but I'm always looking to see which one of these interests is going to align to your ultimate purpose in the world, because we all have a purpose, right? And asking your child what do they like to do, and if they're nonverbal, observing your child and what their interests are is going to be super important in determining ultimately the career path that they want for themselves, right? There's another study out there which I found so endearing, and I will link the article below. And it is this idea that people with autism are more likely than others to have a strong desire to make a difference in the world. Now, this can be aligned to the fact that they are of a marginalized community. And last week I used the term marginalized, and some people were curious about what that meant. And essentially, in its simplest form, it means a group of people in a large scope of our society. It is a subset of the society who is looked at differently, treated differently, and there are systems in place that create barriers for them to thrive. So if you are a Black person, you're part of a marginalized community. If you're part of the LGBTQ community, you are part of a marginalized community. And if you are part of a neurodiverse community, specifically autism, you are part of a marginalized community. If you have multiple of these identities, then the marginalized community is a little bit more intense, if you will. But going back to my point, that oftentimes when you are part of a marginalized community, your experiences of discrimination and experience barriers and being misunderstood or mistreated creates a fire within you, a purpose within you to make a difference in the world for other people who identify in the same way that you do. And the article that is linked below speaks a lot about how people on the autism spectrum have a strong desire to make a difference. So when we think about what I mentioned around identifying your purpose in pursuing a career, think about it in alignment to what also is going to make a difference in the world. And keep in mind, making a difference doesn't have to be grand or vast, especially in this day and age where everyone wants to go viral or be seen and heard on large platforms. Making a difference could be day to day, supporting someone who has your same experiences, volunteering somewhere. Those are essential to creating a healthy sense of identity and purpose. And as a parent, I would highly encourage you to start instilling in your child a healthy sense of identity now, so that they feel empowered to make a difference in the community in which they exist in the future. Now that I've spoken about some of the ways in which we can prepare our children for what it looks like to exist in the workplace and thrive in the workplace, I want to talk a little bit about an experience I had over the weekend.